Hello, hello. Gonna grab this commander. And, well, of course, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here. And I couldn't resist not to use all the possible screens as a graphic designer. And I'd like to thank the Pack House for inviting me. I also would like to excuse myself because I won't speak too much about graphic design tonight. But I would like to start by sort of highlighting some keywords that derive from the very introduction to this event that you might have read since you are here. So the idea of lifelong learning, this need of constant evolution, the perspective on disruptive markets, the necessity of a new set of skills, the fluidity and responsivity that we just heard about, the hybridity, and finally this idea of the entrepreneurial spirit. And this kind of keywords are really like my most urgent concern. In fact, I write on a blog which is as was already introduced, called Entreprecariat, which again stands for this relationship, which I will try to explain tonight, between like these two atmospheric pressure, let's say, like the need of being an entrepreneur and let's say growing precarious condition. But tonight I would like to focus more on this idea of entrepreneurship. For me, like, the question of entrepreneurship is really like an enigma. So as you see here, like, there are many different people coming from different backgrounds, different cultural and social backgrounds, and they are all somehow defined, among other things, for the fact of being entrepreneurs, no? In a way, they become also role models. And what it means nowadays to become an entrepreneur. Of course, like the technological field had played a big role, and of course we cannot avoid to consider like two main figures, which are of course like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, which are framed by the media and by the public discourse as both as rebels. At least they were. Like Bill Gates was a rebel in relationship to the corporate culture of IBM, and ironically, Steve Jobs became a rebel towards the corporate culture of Microsoft. And nowadays, you could find a lot of questions, like for example on Quora, about these two cultish figures and the way to become somehow like them. So tips on how many hours Steve Jobs would sleep, or Bill Gates would how many meals a day Bill Gates would have. And this kind of what I would call a sort of entrepreneurial colonization doesn't only involve adults, but you can see it in things like this. This is, of course, a cherry-picked example, so bear with me. So it's a new magazine, which is, of course, targeted at young girl teenagers, and the goal is to transform them into entrepreneur by using their own brand, by building their own brand on YouTube, on Sketch, for example. And something that adds up to this is also this idea of entertainment, so entrepreneurial entertainment with formats like The Apprentice, Shark Tank, Planet of the Apps, which all derive from this Japanese format called Tigers of Money, which was really humiliating in a way because people will go there and beg for money to investors. So what we see through this kind of format is this idea of performative pedagogy, this idea that we learn to perform a certain role in society, no? So how does entrepreneurship, which is an actual practice, becomes a sort of ideology? I'm going to quickly try to do a journey into the history of entrepreneurship, and sorry if I have to go very back in time. So this young lad that you see here is like an extremely important economist, Joseph Schumpeter, Viennese, and is mostly famous for this concept of creative destruction. So the idea that basically the evolution of society is not so much based on improvement and optimization, but on constant destruction of institution and organization that creates new ones. No? At the same time, Joseph Schumpeter, when he was really young, he came up with this idea of Unternehmergeist, which literally means entrepreneurial spirit. It's interesting to see how the young Schumpeter used to see society at the time. So he actually had this idea of a very pyramidally structured society in which at the very bottom there was like an hedonist mass that was too busy not to die, not to perish in order to come up with inventions. In the second layer, we had inventors, of course, a minority that had like a more acute intelligence, so they were able to combine goods and services to come up with new ones. And finally, a very tiny small minorities of men of action that would be able to take advantage of both the other step of the pyramid. In Schumpeter's term, like the entrepreneur is really an heroic kind of role. So it's someone who amend the text, someone who faces risk without timidity, as it says here. And he was really prescient at the time, and we are speaking of 1911. So he understood already at the time that the feature of life of the entrepreneur gained some sort of universality. So we all, which is kind of paradoxical, because we have this very special role that becomes a standard for everybody else. So jumping in time, doing fast forward to the 80s, we have Peter Drucker, which was a guru of management. And he was, of course, a follower of the ideas of Schumpeter, but at the same time he tried to extend it by proposing this idea of the entrepreneurial society. And again, in his idea, like the entrepreneur was a rebel, was someone who would upset and disorganize, a bit like an artist, a bit like a designer in the ways we see nowadays. And his suggestion for improving society was to transform it by transforming everybody in innovators and entrepreneurs, filled with entrepreneurial values. No? And how to do this? So, of course, like he was suggesting to familiarize citizens with the idea of flexibility, of continuous learning, and acceptance of change as normal. How to do this? By also destroying the welfare system and permanent jobs. Why doing that? Because, of course, like the permanent job and the stability of a contract would prevent people to innovate, because they wouldn't have the incentive to do so. So this is, for me, it's really interesting to see how much the Peter Drucker dream became somehow reality. So it became so much reality that many entrepreneurs now look back at the origin of the species and say that all human beings are entrepreneurs. This is by Reid Hoffman, which is the founder of LinkedIn. So basically, they were all entrepreneurs all the time, no? And finally, entrepreneurship somehow invades the very space of the mind with the ideas of Jeffrey Timmons, which was a professor at Harvard School of Economy. And here it provides a nice portrait of the entrepreneur based on his study on the successful ones in his own specific context of Harvard as well. So what are the common attitudes? This idea of working hard, this idea of intense commitment or work ethic, this idea of burning with competitive desire to excel and win, and to use failure in a positive way. And also, going back to the magazine, we see that this really becomes naturalized in many ways, this idea of entrepreneurial spirit, entrepreneur gene, and even in form of a Lombrosian phrenology, in which like the most important part of our mind becomes or at least of the entrepreneur becomes to create our own reality. So to conclude this short excursus within like the entrepreneurial spirit, I want to show how in popular culture entrepreneurialism becomes a matter of common sense. You might know this meme, which is a so-called exploitable meme. So there is a common structure, and everybody can change it and add his own version of it. So what is the inner logic of the meme "Be Like Bill"? So Bill is like an average man that does things in a very following his common sense, following an etiquette, like doing what is right. So, for example, Bill is on the internet. Bill is smart. Bill sees something that offends him. He doesn't comment, so he doesn't get into a flame. After some time, a meme was done based on that structure, and the protagonist was Elon Musk. And it's very interesting how the logic of common sense was translated to Elon Musk. So it's all based on the power of will. So Elon Musk wanted a new payment method on the internet, so he created PayPal, etc., etc. And the two final lines are very interesting to me because they also suggest an attitude towards the world. So Elon doesn't not tell everyone how bad the world is. He doesn't complain, no? Elon is a man of action. He's working on changing the world. To conclude, I want just to go back a bit quickly on this word to see how much they are not neutral, and they can also provide some sort of incentive not to change the world around us. And of course, like to add some sort of responsibility toward the designer themselves rather than the structural political condition around them. Yeah, so I wanted to conclude here. Thank you.
Okay. Great.